Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back for part two of my two-part series for the My Monthly Hero October 2018 card kit. Like I said, this is part two, so if you missed part one, head back to my channel and check that out. So I wanted to show you guys something before I get started on any cards. I like to, well, as we all know, if you get these kits or have gotten these kits for a while, they always come with a bunch of dies. And I have found that just getting the magnet sheets that are typically out there on the market sometimes can be a little bit expensive, but I found these ones on Amazon, and I will link those down below. Some of the reviews were a little bit mixed in that they didn't think that the magnet was very sturdy or very strong, and I have found actually that it is. I think it's pretty strong. Yeah, it's a fairly flimsy magnet, but for the price, you get 25 of them for like just over $14. At least that's what I got them for. So I will link that down below if that's something that you might be interested in. And yeah, so I just wanted to share something that I found was very helpful. Card number 5 actually isn't a card at all. It's actually gift tags, or it could be ornaments as well. I am going to use some of that glitter paper along with the tree die that came in the kit, and I'm going to use it with the cutout and that really big die that actually cuts out the leaves, or at least cuts parts of the leaves out so you can pop those up. So I'm putting, I have just enough room to fit my Big Shot up on my desk, and I'm going to show you just that I'm popping it through that glitter cardstock using my Sizzix Big Shot. And I'm going to do that a couple times with that green, and I'm going to do it also with the silver. I'm going to end up making 4. So as you can see, it ends up popping up some of those ends. And I want a back for these as well, so I'm going to use just that outline die, and I'm going to use that with some Nina Desert Storm cardstock, and that will go on the back so that I can write a name on the back for the tag, or if I just want to use it as an ornament, at least that way the back looks pretty. As you can see, I'm just going to go through and pop up all those leaves, or all those needles, or whatever you want to call them, as best I can. And I have some cream and Kraft baker's twine, and I'm going to put those in between my layers with some score tape. So I'll fold those over, and then I'll just use a big piece of score tape, stick that down on my Nina cardstock, and that's the Desert Storm, and then I will stick my string down on top of that too. And that gives you kind of an idea of what it'll look like. Excuse me. And then I'm going to grab some Kraft tacky glue and just go all along the edges. I don't want to glue down the whole image because clearly if those pine needles, if I want those to stick up, I wouldn't want to put glue all over the back of that. So I'm just making sure to put it all over the edges and pretty heavily where the Kraft and cream baker's twine is. And then I will just press down firmly all over those edges. And then I will have my tag just about ready to go. So I did all of those. And that took a little bit of time, but I think you could crank these out pretty quickly, really. And now to embellish them, I want them to look like Christmas trees, so I'm taking some more of that Kraft tacky glue, and I'm going to take those iridescent stars that came in the kit, I'm going to put those all over this silver Christmas tree. And I end up decorating all of them just a little bit differently. I use sequins for the other 3, but I use different sequin mixes for those other 3. I really love the way the iridescent stars look. They're subtle, but they're really pretty in person. And you get a good look at them in the picture at the end. These were so much fun to make. I can see making a lot more of these because that die is just amazing. I love the intricacy of the pine needles and how you can pop those up, and yeah, and I popped some sequins underneath some of those. So that finishes off the first project of today's Let's Make 8. For card number 6, I'm going to build a scene, and I don't typically like to bring in a lot of outside things other than what's in the kit, but in this case I did want to use the Starry Night Brushstroke Bold Prints by Hero Arts. It's a giant 6x6 stamp set, or stamp, and I put my cardstock, which is just from my stash, into my stamp platform, and I'm not realizing at this point that I'm screwing it up. My point, what I really wanted to do was have it as a part of my my card base, but by doing it this way, it looks like I'm putting it on the back. So I will fix this later, but I do go ahead and stamp, and I'm using Broken China Distress Oxide ink. It doesn't look like a whole lot at first. It's very, very subtle on that blue background, but that's really what I wanted. I want it to be very subtle. So I go ahead and stamp that down, because Distress Oxide ink stamps so beautifully on cardstock, which is unlike the Distress inks themselves. They're just formulated a little bit differently. So it's at this point that I realized that's not going to work. So I set that aside to dry, and then I'm going to stamp my images out onto some Express It cardstock, and I'm going to use my Memento Tuxedo Black ink to stamp those out. And I don't show you because I lost the footage somehow, but I do color and I do cut all of those out. And that tree that you see there actually came from part 1 of this series. I made this when I was trying to make my first cards. So yeah, that's where that tree comes from. I did not want to waste that tree. So if you want to see how I made that tree, head on back to part 1 and you will see. So I've trimmed down some white cardstock, and that's going to be my snowbank, and I trimmed down that panel that I had stamped just a little bit ago as well, so that I fit that on top of a Nina Classic Crest cardstock base that is a top folding A2 size card, and I'm just going to start attaching the pieces to the panel, and I'm using my Tombow tape runner there to get the snowbank down, and then I will use that on the back of my blue card panel, and I'm going to attach that to my base. And then to attach the tree, because that's made of watercolor paper, I went ahead and decided to use some, well, after I got rid of the white eye on my fawn because it looked like a demon. Not very Christmas-like. So I decided to grab my tacky glue, and I'm going to glue down my tree using the tacky glue. And then I decide that I want to get the sentiment down before I place down any of the other elements. So I'll put that back in my stamp platform, and I'll use my magnet to make sure that my card doesn't move anywhere. I'm going to use the sentiment that says Merry Christmas. I'll line that up, and then I will ink that up with my Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And I'll stamp that out a couple times to make sure that I have a good crisp image. And then I'll take that out and I'll start adhering all of my elements. And I'm going to use that same tacky glue to adhere the deer and the 3 little birds. They're all going to be decorating the tree. And so I've grabbed some sequins that I had used in the previous project, and I'm going to place those. Originally I was going to do ornaments that came in the kit, but I just decided, honestly, I was a little bit too lazy to cut them out, stamp them, and then cut them. I know that sounds silly, but when you have all the dies, typically, it's kind of nice to use those. So I just didn't want to cut them out. And I thought the sequins would be a nice touch anyway. So I'm going to tack those down so that each little critter has a sequin in his or her mouth. Trying to change up the little placement of the colors. So I have 2 red, 1 blue, and a yellow. And then I'm going to grab some stickles and some perfect pearls, and I'm going to decorate the tree that way. And let me tell you, I used Festive Stickles, turquoise stickles, and some buttercup liquid pearls. I don't show you all of that, but I do that. And I really like the way this one turned out. So that finishes card number 6. I had mentioned in part 1 how these stamp sets actually, or this stamp set actually reminded me of a lot of movement. And so this card is going to have some movement on it. I am starting off by stamping my tree using some Memento Tuxedo Black ink, and I'm going to do that 3 times using my stamp platform, and I'm stamping that onto some Express It cardstock, which I use for my Copic coloring, and I've mentioned that many times before. I sound like a broken record. So I'm going to show you the coloring for this tree just because I wanted to show you that it might look intimidating, but no one's really going to notice, especially if the tree happens to be in the background. So I'm not even really being that careful. Maybe on the ends I am, but as far as the inside of the tree, I'm not really being careful about how I color that. And I've sped this up about 4 times. And then I bring in a darker color, and all I'm doing is flicking that out from the center. So super simple. Now I have a piece of Hero Arts wood grain cardstock, and I have used some broken china Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to put some of that iridescent watercolor into that once again, and I'm just going to use one of my watercolor brushes with some water, and I'm going to try and flick that onto my panel. I'm trying to get a good amount of splatters because that is going to be my background. And I have trimmed down a snow slope. Sorry that footage got, it's deleted somehow. But I am covering that with Versamark ink because I want this to stand out from the background, not only with that wood grain, but I want this to be a little bit shiny because this is going to be a snowbank. And so I've covered that with white embossing powder, and then now I'm going to melt that with my heat tool. Now I've got that snowbank lined up with my background, and I'm using an X-Acto knife right along that edge. And I'm going to cut out or mimic that slope, cutting that out, and you'll see what I mean here. So I'm just running that along, making sure that that got cut through, because I plan to make this a slider card. And so I'm just trying to make that a little bit bigger, and I'll manipulate that the whole time I'm making that card. I'll find that it's not quite big enough, so I'll need to manipulate it. So with those trees, those are going in the background, the ones that I made earlier, and I'm just using my Tombow adhesive, which is just a tape runner, and I'm going to tape those down and trim off the excess of what I don't need. So that's part of the reason why I was kind of willy-nilly with my Copic coloring. I didn't think it was as big of a deal because it's in the background. And I flipped that over, and I'm using that X-Acto knife one more time to cut out that part of the tree, because I need my slider mechanism to be able to slide very easily. And I'm just trimming off those excess trees from that panel. And afterwards, I actually used my smallest circle nestability, and I cut out a circle because I am trying to decide exactly where my mechanism will go, and I want to make sure I have enough room because I'm using foam tape. You're going to need foam tape for something like this. So I have that one layer. I will eventually do 2 layers, but right now I have 1 layer. It's time to start assembling my mechanism. So you see that little tic tac piece there? That is actually a slider piece. That is from My Favorite Things, and I'm just using some tacky glue to adhere that to my little disc that I cut out. And I'm putting a little bit more of that tacky glue on there, and I'm going to put my little sledder, my little sledding guy, which I colored to look like something from The Christmas Story. And once that was dry, I kind of try to manipulate that around a little bit. And this is where I discover that I need my mechanism slider slope to be a little bit wider. So I'm just using that X-Acto knife, and I am evening that out the best that I can. And I'll just keep doing that until I get him to slide at least a little bit better. For my base, I just have some of that Nina cardstock that I've been using this whole time, and that was a piece that was 5.5 inches by 8 1/4, and I scored that at 4 or 8.5. Scored at 4 1/4, and that's where I put the extra layer of foam tape. And now I've adhered my panel to my card base, and it starts to slide a little bit easier. It just needs a little bit of manipulation. It needs me to work with it a little bit more, if you know what I'm saying. Off camera, I did stamp my sentiment in Versamark ink, and then I covered that in white embossing powder and heat set that. And now I'm just trimming that down using my Fiskars trimmer. And then I will adhere that to my panel with some of that same glue that I used earlier, and that will finish off this card. So pretty fun, just getting them to go back and forth. That's card number 7. For card number 8, which is the final card in this series, I have a piece of that blue glitter cardstock from the kit, and I have trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and I also have a piece of Nina Desert Storm cardstock. In order to stamp my tree, I want that to be crisp. I'm putting that inside my stamp platform, and I'm just going to grab some white cardstock that I have from my stash, along with some Barely Beige ink from Simon Says Stamp. I wanted a white tree, and in order to do that, I didn't want to have black lines, so I thought I would stamp that using a Barely Beige ink. And I think that it turned out pretty well. I just stamp it a couple times to make sure that it is good and crisp. I will line up my die over the top of that using some micropore tape to hold things in place, and then I will run that through my Big Shot machine. I'll stick that onto my panel just to kind of see where the placement is, and I'm really a clean and simple kind of stamper at heart, And so these kinds of cards really speak to me. So for the next part, I'm going to stamp the star. I used that same Barely Beige ink and then used its coordinating die to trim that out. And now I'll get ready to stamp my sentiment. I stamped that onto some black cardstock using some Versamark ink, and then I heat set that after I put some white powder over the top of it. At this point, my sentiment strip has been trimmed down, so I'm going to give it a fishtail banner. I do that by cutting into the center and then letting the edges meet up with that with my scissors. And then I will use some liquid adhesive to adhere that to my glitter panel. And then I am going to adhere my tree with my tape runner. Turns out the tape runner works okay on top of that glitter paper. And so I'll also adhere my star that way too. And once all that's adhered, I will flip that over and trim off the excess. And then I will adhere that to my Nina Desert Storm panel or card base using that same tape runner. And that works out really nicely. For some embellishment, I'm going to use some of those iridescent stars. Not too many, just 3. I thought about putting them all over the tree, and then I thought, well, I think I want this to be a little bit more clean. So I will just grab my liquid adhesive, and I will put a little dollop of that under each star, and that will finish off the embellishment. And that's going to finish off card number 8. So let's go ahead and take a look at the last 4 cards in this 2-part series. If you missed part 1, head back to my channel. But I would love to know which one of these projects was your favorite. I always love that. If you liked this video, please hit the like button and share it with your friends if you want to. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't done so that you don't miss anything. And as always, I do appreciate you stopping by.